Would you believe me if I told you that a 90-year-old war veteran stood up to a gang of bikers? It sounds impossible, but this is the story of Margaret Peggy Thompson, a woman whose courage and determination defied all odds. In a small town, held hostage by fear, Peggy proved that sheer willpower can overcome any obstacle, even when everything seems lost. But the most surprising part? She made a phone call that completely changed the course of events. Who did she call, and how did it turn the tide so dramatically? Before we dive into the full story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss incredible stories like this. Now let's uncover every detail of this powerful provocation was something Peggy could ignore, but dishonor, never. That night, sitting in her rocking chair, the echoes of the bikers' laughter still lingered in her mind. She remembered tougher times, missions where lives were on the line, and she realized that once again, it was time to act. Even so, she hesitated for a moment. After all, time had left its marks on her body, and her strength wasn't what it once was. But the thought of protecting her town and her honor reignited the fire in her heart. Peggy knew that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to face it head-on. The next day, as she stepped out of her house, Peggy noticed a few shattered windows and graffiti on the walls of local businesses. It was clear the gang was expanding their territory of terror. The once peaceful town seemed submerged in a cloud of tension. However, the veteran held her head high, meeting the frightened townsfolk with a look that said, "This won't last forever." She understood that sometimes the greatest weapon was the confidence instilled in those who needed leadership. And at that moment, the town desperately needed someone to declare, "I won't back down." What Peggy didn't know was that her next decision would change everything. That very afternoon, when she picked up the phone, she made a call that would mark the beginning of one of the most unexpected alliances of her life. But who was on the other end of the line? The answer to that question would be the start of a new battle, not in distant lands, but in her own hometown. Peggy knew she needed an ally, not just any friend or casual acquaintance, but someone with the strength and courage to face a group as intimidating as Havoc's bikers. After spending the morning in quiet reflection, she picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. On the other end of the line was the deep, slightly raspy voice of Iron Jack Morrison. Jack was a former battle companion, a man who understood both the chaos of war and the loyalty it forged. He listened attentively as Peggy explained the situation, and before she even finished, he firmly replied, "I'm on my way." Jack didn't come alone. He brought his own troop of veteran bikers, men and women who, like him, had traded military uniforms for leather jackets, but still carried the disciplined spirit of a well-trained unit. Within hours, the roar of engines filled the town again, but this time it wasn't a harbinger of chaos. These were Peggy's allies arriving, their serious faces and determined eyes making it clear they meant business. Havoc's gang, watching from a distance, realized the game had changed. For the first time, they felt they might not be the only ones commanding respect. Havoc, however, wasn't the type to back down easily. Not only did he ignore the presence of Jack's group, but he also sent a direct message. Another local business was vandalized, this time with an explicit taunt scrawled on the door. Peggy understood this as a challenge, a calculated attempt to destabilize the town and prove that regardless of who stood beside her, they were still in control. But for Peggy and Jack, this was more than just a provocation. It was a clear sign they needed to anticipate the enemy's moves. Peggy and Jack called a town meeting in the small community hall, a space that rarely saw such a crowd. There, Peggy spoke with the unwavering authority that had earned her so much respect. She explained that strength wasn't just about numbers, but about unity and strategy. Jack followed with a clear plan: patrol the streets, protect the businesses, and above all refused to rise to the gang's provocations. The community, previously fragmented by fear, began to find strength in the words of the two veterans. But Havoc still had tricks up his sleeve, and the town would soon realize the fight was far from over. That very night, under the cold, silent moonlight, something unexpected happened, something that would challenge everything Peggy and Jack had planned. What could it be? Havoc was not the kind of man to accept being challenged. To him, the town was a chessboard, and he was the ultimate player. While Peggy and Jack organized patrols and worked to restore calm, Havoc escalated his actions. The gang began attacking openly. Stores were broken into in the middle of the night, windows shattered, and goods stolen. Residents reported bikers speeding recklessly through the streets, spreading panic. The town, which had begun to muster courage, felt the heavy weight of fear once more. Even Jack's organized patrols faced difficulties as the gang seemed to be everywhere at once, like an uncontrollable swarm. The attacks weren't just physical, but psychological as well. One of the darkest moments came when a family woke in the middle of the night to find a motorcycle ablaze in their front yard with a red-painted warning on their fence. "Leave while you still can." The message was clear. Havoc wasn't backing down without a fight. When Peggy heard about the incident, she remained silent for a moment, her gaze fixed in the distance. She knew she couldn't let fear consume the town, but she also knew that defeating Havoc would require more than strength. It would require intelligence. On a stormy afternoon, as the streets lay eerily empty, Havoc made his boldest move yet. He and his men stormed the town square, dismounted their bikes, and delivered an impromptu address. Havoc declared with a cynical smile that the town now belonged to him. He promised safety to those who complied and destruction to those who resisted. His tone made it clear this was no longer just intimidation, it was war. For Peggy, this was a turning point. She realized that without swift and precise action, the town would be swallowed by chaos. Jack, meanwhile, began to notice something troubling. Havoc's gang didn't seem like a mere group of disorganized troublemakers. Their movements hinted at some level of training or prior experience. The suspicion that Havoc might have ties to other criminal groups, or even a shadowy military past, made Peggy and Jack even more determined. It was time to abandon reactive measures and take control of the situation. That night, Peggy gathered Jack and some community leaders in the town's old library. Under the flickering light of candles, she outlined a daring plan, one that would use Havoc's own arrogance against him. But was the community ready for such a risky move? Peggy knew that winning required more than courage. It demanded strategy. At the break of dawn the next day, she began crafting a plan that combined her deep tactical knowledge with the limited resources available in the town. Gathered with Jack and a few townspeople, she laid out an approach that wouldn't just confront Havoc, but dismantle his influence. Every detail was scrutinized: the gang's typical operating hours, the town's most vulnerable points, and even potential allies who could be swayed to their side. It was as if Peggy was back on the battlefield, leading a critical operation. The first step of the plan was to reclaim psychological ground. Using the element of surprise, Peggy suggested setting up a network of lookouts at strategic points throughout the town, ready to act the moment the gang made its next move. These lookouts, consisting of residents quickly trained by Jack, were equipped with powerful flashlights and whistles to alert one another and disorient the bikers. The goal wasn't to engage directly, but to confuse them and demonstrate that, for the first time, the town was united and vigilant. Peggy also recognized the importance of community unity. She organized a series of town meetings to engage the residents further. Each family was assigned a role: looking after the most vulnerable, protecting neighboring homes, and creating makeshift barricades in key streets. The town, which had previously seemed paralyzed by fear, began to show signs of strength and determination. Even the most skeptical began to believe that standing up to the gang might be possible. Peggy's leadership seemed to awaken a dormant spirit in those around her. Meanwhile, Jack led a smaller, more experienced team on a special mission, identifying Havoc's outside allies. They discovered that some gang members came from neighboring towns, drawn by the promise of chaos and unchecked freedom. Using this information, Peggy and Jack began planning actions to undermine the gang's ability to bring in reinforcements. It wouldn't be easy, but every small victory helped level the playing field. By the time the decisive night arrived, everything was in place. The streets were silent, but the residents were ready, flashlights and whistles in hand, barricades set up, and a tense stillness in the air. When the roar of the motorcycles echoed once again, Peggy stood at the center of it all, her presence radiating confidence. What happened next would determine the town's fate. The night of the confrontation was unlike anything the town had ever experienced. Under Peggy's leadership, the residents moved like a well-coordinated unit. Every whistle was a call to resistance. Every flashlight beam illuminated not only the streets, but also the renewed spirit of those who once lived in fear. Havoc and his gang, trying to advance, encountered blocked roads and a population that no longer cowered. With every attempt at intimidation, the townspeople responded with courage, proving they were no longer victims, but active defenders of their community. Havoc, frustrated and disoriented, realized his advantage was slipping away. Around every corner, his gang was forced to retreat. But the turning point came when one of the gang's younger members, a boy named Caleb, was captured by Jack's team. Instead of violence, Peggy ordered him to be treated with dignity and encouraged him to reflect on his actions. Hearing Peggy's firm yet compassionate words, Caleb revealed crucial details about Havoc's plans and surprisingly expressed a desire to leave the gang. Under Peggy's guidance, the town didn't just win the physical battle, it began an emotional healing process. Residents started reaching out to other gang members, planting seeds of doubt in their minds. Many of Havoc's followers weren't hardened criminals, but vulnerable individuals who had been lured by the sense of belonging he offered. Following Peggy's lead, the town initiated community programs to provide alternatives for those willing to change their lives. What started as a violent conflict turned into an opportunity for redemption for some. Havoc, seeing his influence slipping away, decided to flee, but not without leaving a warning. Before disappearing, he issued a veiled threat, promising the town hadn't seen the last of him. For Peggy, however, this was a victory, not because Havoc had been defeated, but because the town had regained its strength, its unity, and its ability to face adversity. Standing beside Peggy, Jack summed up the town's newfound confidence. They may try to return, but now they know. This town is ours. In the days that followed, the transformation was evident. Where fear had once prevailed, there was now hope. Where divisions had existed, there was now unity. And where Peggy had once been seen as an elderly veteran, she was now hailed as a leader, a symbol of resilience and inspiration. Her courage didn't just protect the town, it redefined it. Residents who once walked with their heads down now strolled proudly through the streets, knowing they were stronger together than any threat they might face. Peggy, meanwhile, returned to her routine. Yet she knew something had changed forever. The veteran who had faced wars far from home had now won the most significant battle of her life, not with weapons, but with strategy, unity, and above all, heart. And in every corner of the town, her story would continue to be told, inspiring future generations. Peggy's story teaches us that true strength doesn't come from youth or physical power, but from the courage to never give up, even when the odds seem impossible. In a world where we often feel small in the face of challenges, she shows us that even one person can inspire an entire community to rise and fight. And the most incredible part? Change began with a simple decision: the refusal to accept injustice. Now think about your own life. What battle have you been putting off? What's stopping you from making a difference? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us how Peggy's story has inspired you. We'd love to hear from you. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss emotional and powerful stories like this one. Here, every story has the power to transform. See you next time.